Okay, not as important as the UPA or the elbow escape is what we call the straight arm frame. And sometimes there's variations, like one variation we used to call the hydraulic. There's very different variations of this, but it's basically when you stiff arm your opponent who's on top of you and mount, and you are able to either bump or kind of shrimp and slide yourself out such that your knees clear their mount, and now essentially you have them back in some sort of guard, right? And again, there's a bunch of different variations. However, one of the main mechanics that you'll see when you see a one-arm straight version is you will see versions of this where it's going to be very simple to, if you take cross sides, to the reverse shrimp. So you take cross sides, somebody's here, and I were to bridge into them, and then as they try and drive back down into me, I'm doing this, right, like this. So I turn this into a straight arm frame. He's now sort of tilted with his body leaning away, and now from here, I shrimp myself out to the point that he's either weightless enough that I can sit up and take him over, or if he's real strong driving into me, I can shrimp myself out of the position altogether, right? So that can work for sure from a cross-sides bottom position. But me shrimping away from the straight arm is not the initial movement that I want to have from mount bottom, because the orientation is different. So instead we're going to take some mechanical cues from a very similar motion, which is a Turkish get-up. Some of you seen, you can Google it or YouTube it, Turkish get-up with a kettlebell, for instance. So let's take a look. So go ahead and mount. Okay. Same rules apply. My knees are down, so he is not fully locked into a guard, or at least one of my knees has to be down. Both of my arms are to my side on top of his knees, and my shoulders are packed. So he is now again oriented down over my hips, so even if he's starting to lean forward to reach with his arms to attack me, what I'm going to do is take one arm from here, and if this were no gi, I would just basically, keeping my wrist straight, make a frame into his body and just kind of take the slack up. Anytime you have a gi, might as well grab either the jacket if the belt's untied, or grab the belt, and then what I'm looking to do from here is get my arm straight. Now if he's kind of pressing into me, it may be hard to do that. If you go with your hand like this, sometimes that can turn, whether he's trying to or not, into a little bit of a wrist lock. So I like to go nice and straight and make this like a steel beam. So what I'll do first, if my elbow is bent up too much, like this, is I'll move myself away from my arm, get the positioning here with my grip, and then I come back into it, and you'll see that now my elbow is to my side, and all that space, all the slack comes out. You feel the connection, right? So now there's a great connection on his body. The problem, however, is if I now start to try and move Arthur in that direction with the stiff arm and shrimp 45 degrees away from it, and he's nice and tight with his knees, okay, and he might be holding on to my gi and everything, from here it's going to be very difficult, yes, and especially in a much bigger, stronger opponent. Very hard. So what I'm going to do is, again, I move myself to get my arm straight, then I come back in. Now it's nice and straight. He feels the connection. It's kind of lined up with his center line of his body. It hasn't crossed his body where he can turn his hip and kill it. Right? If you turn that hip in a little bit, I still have it. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to backstroke my arm from here, and when I turn, I'm going to turn before I shrimp, I should say. And this shoulder of the framing arm is going to come directly over the shoulder of the bottom arm. Okay, so backstroke. So notice I'm not shrimping yet. The first motion I do is this. Okay, so I just turn like a cylinder, so the framing arm top shoulder is aligned directly over the bottom shoulder. Okay, now what I want you to see is, as I start to move my hips away at this point, Arthur simply can't stay on top. So let's look at that from a side angle. Okay, so elbows are down in here. If I feel like my arm is too bent, I'll move myself away, then I bring myself back in, make sure it's nice and straight, my wrist is straight. Now even if Arthur's leaning into me, he's holding on to me. Okay, when I backstroke this arm and turn this shoulder over my other shoulder, okay, so the framing arm shoulder. Now's when my one leg will come up. I turn from here, now watch. Very, very hard to stop. And you'll find that you can even do this technique on people that outweigh you by 30 pounds, 50 pounds, and understand how to use their pressure, as long as you have all those mechanical pieces in the mix and you do it at the right time. Notice at no point did I try and bump and take my knees off the mat so that he could lock his inverted close guard on me, like get a full lock of his ankles together from mount, which would make this much more difficult. Okay. From this position, that is, again, not the most important escape, but I would consider that the third of the big three.